These boundaries shift when we say so.
No! Not when steel pins say otherwise.
She slammed the notice against my chest before I could even breathe, the edge of the paper cutting across my shirt as if she meant to brand me with it. Marjorie Keaton, standing there in her crimson blazer like she owned every inch of land her eyes touched, glared at me with the same certainty tyrants use when they think no one will challenge them. Behind her, 2 self-appointed HOA officers fanned out across my vineyard rows, snapping photos as if they were documenting a crime scene instead of trespassing on the one place I couldn't afford to lose. "Read it," she said, chin lifted. "You're in violation." But before her voice even finished echoing off the vines, I dropped the truth she never expected. "This land isn't in your jurisdiction, not 1 inch of it." Her smirk twitched, just barely, but I saw it. And if you've ever felt that rush in your chest when someone finally tries the wrong person, stay right here and hit the subscribe button now. What comes next rewrites everything you think you know about standing your ground. I steadied the notice against my palm, letting the early light cut across the ink. She thought she could intimidate me with printed threats. She thought I was just another quiet landowner who'd cave the second the board chair raised her voice. She had no idea who she was dealing with. "My name's Elias Mercer," I said, keeping my voice level. "And I spent 16 years as a land survey engineer before I took over this place. Every easement line, every parcel break, every inch of this soil has been measured by my own hands." The clipboard queen didn't like that. Her jaw tightened, and the hand gripping her documents shifted as though she needed to find a new angle of attack. But this wasn't about paperwork, or even boundaries drawn in county records. It was about something she couldn't see. The weight of a promise I made the night my father died. This vineyard isn't just rows of grapes, it's the last piece of him I have left. I grew up watching him kneel beside the old boundary oak with a compass in one hand and a survey map in the other. He used to say, "Lines matter, son, not because they're drawn, but because they're earned." The last time he ever marked this property line with me, he didn't say goodbye. He just placed my hand on the trunk of that oak and whispered, "Guard it." So, when the enforcer in crimson stepped over that same invisible line with her cheap printed violations and manufactured authority, something inside me locked into place. I looked past her toward the vines, still wet with morning dew, still heavy with the work of generations, and something tightened in my chest. Losing this place wouldn't just hurt, it would erase every story my father built with sweat and stubbornness. It would silence the only legacy I have left that bears his fingerprints. And the tyrant in heels didn't stop. She waved her entourage deeper into the property. "Document everything. He'll be facing fines by end of day." She didn't care that she was trespassing. She didn't care that I wasn't part of her HOA or any HOA. She cared about control, about expansion, about making my vineyard the next trophy she could present to her board. I stepped closer, lowering my voice enough so only she could hear it. "Where are you watching from?" I asked. Not to her, but to the viewer, who knows exactly what it feels like when someone tries to take what isn't theirs. A breeze cut through the vineyard, carrying the smell of soil and the faint sweetness of crushed grapes. Behind us, one of her officers of rules snapped another photo, acting as if he had state authority instead of a laminated badge printed in a basement office. Marjorie lifted her chin again, refusing to back down. "We'll decide what falls under Silvercrest Bluff's jurisdiction." "No," I said, taking the notice and tearing it cleanly down the center. "You won't." Because I'd already seen the flaw in her plan, the miscalculation, the illegal overreach, the thing that would unravel her entire operation. And I wasn't about to let her walk off my land until she knew exactly how badly she'd misjudged the man standing in front of her. Marjorie Keaton didn't leave my land quietly. The board chair retreated only a few steps, pacing along the edge of my vineyard like a wolf tracing the perimeter of a fence it planned to tear down. I watched her heels dig into the dirt, those sharp, polished points punching marks into soil my father spent 40 years tending. Every movement she made told me she wasn't done, not by a long shot. Behind her, the officer of rules kept snapping photos like he was documenting some covert crime scene. His camera clicked through the quiet morning, as if each shutter strike carried authority. The clipboard queen lifted a new stack of forms, scribbling furiously, crafting a paper trail she hoped would trap me. She wasn't improvising, she was escalating, and I could feel the shift in the air. The way a minor nuisance had just transformed into a full-blown assault. Women like Marjorie didn't accept resistance. They bulldozed it. The enforcer in crimson turned to the two men flanking her. "Make sure these get uploaded before noon," she ordered, her voice sharp enough to cut metal. "We'll classify this as a first-tier violation, with secondary restrictions pending review." Secondary restrictions? I almost laughed. You don't issue secondary restrictions on property you don't own. But she said it like gospel, the same way tyrants in heels speak when they know their audience is too afraid or too confused to question them. But I wasn't confused, and I wasn't afraid. Still, irritation crawled up my spine. I knew HOA abuse could get outrageous, but this wasn't normal. It wasn't procedural. It was personal. She wanted something from this land, and she wanted it badly enough to fabricate authority. As I tracked her pacing, a memory flickered. My dad leaning over the old survey rods he hammered into the ground when I was barely 10, explaining how every line mattered. He called those markers anchors, not because they held the soil, but because they held the truth. Truth Marjorie clearly wasn't expecting to collide with today. I took a slow breath and stepped forward, letting my boots settle in the soft soil between us. "You've already crossed the property boundary," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Your officers have too. That's trespassing." She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She just smiled, this razor-thin expression that told me she'd dealt with opposition before and crushed every bit of it. "Boundaries are fluid when safety is at risk," she replied. Fluid. That word hit harder than anything else she'd said so far. It hinted at her strategy, blurring lines, rewriting definitions, substituting her interpretations for the law. The clipboard queen tucked her documents into a leather folio. "You've ignored multiple notices," she claimed. "There were no notices," I shot back, "because I'm not part of your HOA." Her smirk returned, wider this time. "You're adjacent to our community. That gives us interest." Interest, not authority, just interest. But she twisted that word like it meant dominion. My jaw tightened. Interest doesn't give you rights. The tyrant in heels tilted her head like she was examining a stubborn stain. "We'll see how the county interprets it." And that's when the morning truly shifted, because I caught sight of a neighbor, Gwen Pollard, standing across the fence line. Her arms were crossed, her expression tight. She'd been there long enough to witness the whole encounter, and she looked torn between stepping in and staying out of Marjorie's line of fire. Her presence mattered. People in Silvercrest Bluffs feared the HOA board more than bad weather, which meant seeing Gwen standing there, watching the clipboard queen try to swallow another property, confirmed something I hadn't fully realized. This wasn't just about me. My vineyard wasn't the first target, just the most convenient one. "Elias," Gwen finally called out, her voice uncertain. "Is everything all right?" I heard raised voices. Marjorie spun, annoyance flashing across her face. She hated interruptions she didn't control. "This doesn't concern you," the enforcer in crimson snapped. But Gwen didn't move. She looked from her to me, and something in her expression registered fear, not for herself, for what Marjorie might do to anyone who stood in her way. I took one step toward the fence, keeping my voice even. "Where are you watching from?" I asked quietly, letting the viewers sink into the tension as the morning heat rose across the vines. Gwen hesitated, chewing the inside of her cheek, and in that silence, I recognized the truth buried beneath her fear. She'd seen this pattern before, and she was terrified I'd be the next casualty. What none of them realized, not even Marjorie Keaton, was that I was already preparing for the moment her entire facade would crack. This escalation only confirmed it. The board chair wasn't going to stop, but neither was I. Marjorie Keaton didn't leave the property line even after Gwen drifted back toward her porch, worry etched across her face. The board chair stood there like she was guarding a throne instead of trespassing on land she had no claim to. Her arms folded, her chin lifted, her expression carved with the kind of confidence only someone addicted to authority could wear. The enforcer in crimson wasn't retreating, not when she sensed the slightest crack she could exploit. But everything shifted the moment a county sheriff SUV rolled up the gravel path, tires crunching slowly, deliberately. Dust clouded behind it as the vehicle stopped beside the boundary oak, and when the door opened, I recognized the man stepping out. Deputy Daniel Ruiz, The clipboard queen straightened instantly, smoothing her blazer like she had been expecting him. She didn't call him, I knew that, but she'd manipulated enough situations in Silvercrest Bluffs that I didn't doubt she could twist an officer's presence into false legitimacy. "Deputy," she called, walking toward him with the stride of someone who believed law enforcement existed to serve her personally. "We're conducting a compliance check. He's obstructing it." Ruiz glanced at her, then at me, then at the two fake officers still scattered across my vineyard rows, pretending to hold badges that meant something. His face didn't shift much. Ruiz was known for that stony calm. But his eyes flickered with something uncertain. Conflict lived right there, behind the polite professionalism he was trained to maintain. He stepped closer to the board chair, keeping his voice even. "Ms. Keaton, I didn't receive any formal request from your HOA. Dispatch said there was a disturbance." "There is," she insisted, crossing her arms. "He's refusing inspection." I bit back a sharp laugh. "Because there's no inspection authorized. Not by you, not by anyone." Ruiz's gaze shifted to me again, and this time his jaw tightened slightly, like he already suspected I wasn't the problem, but didn't yet want to contradict the tyrant in heels in front of him. I respected that restraint. I also recognized the pressure building behind his composed expression. This wasn't a clear call for him, not with Marjorie talking like she ran his department too. "What exactly is the issue?" he asked, trying to sound neutral. "She's claiming jurisdiction she doesn't have," I replied. "Silvercrest Bluffs stops 480 feet from the ridge. This vineyard isn't part of her HOA, never has been." The officer of rules paused mid-photo, but the clipboard queen didn't. She stepped forward, almost blocking Ruiz's view of the property. "We have extended perimeter ordinances for safety and environmental consistency." "No, you don't," I cut in, and Ruiz's eyes flicked toward me again. "Not legally." That single word made something shift in him. Not dramatically, but enough. His stance changed by an inch. His breathing leveled. His attention sharpened, not toward the enforcer in crimson, but toward the facts. Marjorie noticed. Her jaw clenched so hard I saw the muscle twitch. "Deputy, this is a simple compliance matter," she insisted. "This is trespassing," I said quietly, "on private agricultural land." Ruiz's eyes drifted to the boundary oak, the property marker everyone in this county knew by name. And in that second, I saw the internal struggle hit him harder. He wasn't confused. He wasn't misinformed. He was calculating, balancing the weight of a woman who wielded HOA power like a weapon against the legal reality he knew he couldn't ignore. His fingers tapped once against his belt, barely noticeable unless you were watching him closely. A sign of hesitation. A man torn between the noise of authority and the truth staring him in the face. The clipboard queen stepped into his field of vision again. "We need your support on this, deputy." But Ruiz didn't move toward her. He stepped toward me. Slow, controlled, careful. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "do you have anything showing this property is outside HOA boundaries?" There it was, the conflict. He wasn't siding with her. He wasn't siding with me. He was trying to find a place to stand without making an enemy of either side. A man caught between pressure and principle. "Not documents," I said. "Proof." I pointed past the vines toward the ridge, toward the natural line every surveyor in this county could identify without a map. Ruiz followed my gaze, and something in his expression cracked open. Understanding, recognition, maybe even guilt that he'd walked onto my land thinking the board chair had legitimate authority. Marjorie saw it too. The fear flickered behind her eyes, fast and angry. The tyrant in heels stepped forward, voice rising. "Deputy Ruiz, you know our policies. We have oversight." He didn't nod. He didn't agree. He just stared at the ridge, then at the boundary oak, and for the first time that morning, he looked at her like he was seeing the truth she'd hoped he wouldn't. I held his gaze, letting him breathe through the weight of that realization, and silently, a new ally began to form, one trapped between duty and manipulation, and about to choose which side he truly stood on. Marjorie Keaton didn't wait for Deputy Ruiz to finish analyzing the ridge or the boundary oak. The board chair snapped her fingers at her officers of rules, calling them back to her side like a commander regrouping troops after a failed push. Her heels carved sharp divots into the dirt as she marched toward Ruiz, dragging the full weight of her authority behind her as if sheer force could rewrite the law. "We're escalating this," the enforcer in crimson declared, her words low and charged. "If he won't comply voluntarily, we'll move to enforcement procedures." Ruiz stiffened. "Ms. Keaton, I still don't see any jurisdictional grounds." "You don't need to," she cut in, stepping so close he had to lean back. "Our board has the right to enforce emergency perimeter guidelines. That's all you need to acknowledge." It wasn't just a lie. It was an attempt to rope the deputy into her fantasy of control, and I saw the instant it hit him. His shoulders tensed, his gaze hardened. He wasn't fully on my side yet, but now he understood he was being used. The clipboard queen raised her tablet, scrolling through a screen filled with forms that looked official until you actually read them. "We'll classify this property as a high-risk adjacency zone," she said, turning the tablet for Ruiz to see. He didn't lean in, he didn't nod. He simply stared, expression unchanged. And that silence was enough to expose the truth. The deputy wasn't buying her manufactured authority anymore. But Marjorie wasn't done. The tyrant in heels turned her full attention to me, the morning sun catching the edge of her blazer like a warning flare. "By refusing an inspection, you're obstructing a lawful HOA action," she announced, raising her voice loud enough for Gwen and any other neighbors to hear. "We'll be issuing fines, citations, and, if necessary, filing a complaint with the county." A chill rolled through the air, not because her threats had power, but because she believed they did. I stepped forward. "You don't have jurisdiction, and you know it." Her expression flickered, one brief flash of frustration before she buried it under arrogance. "We'll see how long you keep saying that," she replied. "Once the county hears your non-compliance record, they'll reconsider your designation." Record, non-compliance, designation. She was constructing an entire fictional framework around my property, like she had rehearsed this attack long before today. The officer of rules chimed in from behind her, holding a camera with a long lens. "We've documented structural inconsistencies along the western fence. That qualifies as environmental hazard compliance." I stared at him. "You're photographing irrigation lines." He lowered the camera, but didn't respond. He didn't have to. They weren't documenting violations. They were manufacturing them. Ruiz watched the exchange with his jaw grinding slightly. The conflict inside him intensified, visible now in the way he shifted his weight, the way his hand hovered near his belt, not out of threat, but tension. He knew this wasn't lawful. He just hadn't decided how far he'd go to stop it. "Deputy," the board chair pressed, "I need your report to reflect obstruction of enforcement." "No," he said quietly, surprising even himself with the firmness in his voice. "I'm not writing that." Marjorie turned, stunned. "Excuse me?" "This isn't an enforcement action," he clarified. "It's a dispute." A dispute. A single word, but enough to crack her illusion of authority. The enforcer in crimson inhaled sharply, fury flashing behind her eyes. "You don't understand what's at stake." "I understand exactly what's at stake," I replied, stepping beside Ruiz. "My father's land, my livelihood, and the truth you're desperate to bury." Her officers shifted nervously. Even they sensed the tide turning. The clipboard queen tried to regain footing. "We'll escalate this to the emergency board. They hold full authority to override your objections." "Do that," I said, "and I'll be ready." Marjorie hesitated, just once, before retreating toward the ridge with her entourage trailing behind her. But the look she cast back at me carried a promise. She wasn't finished, and neither was I. Marjorie Keaton didn't leave the ridge quietly. The board chair paused halfway up the slope, turning just enough to watch whether Ruiz followed her or me. Her stare cut through the morning haze like a threat waiting to be spoken aloud. The enforcer in crimson wasn't retreating. She was recalibrating, plotting her next angle of attack while pretending she still commanded the field. The clipboard queen whispered something to the officer of rules, pointing at the boundary oak as if the tree itself offended her authority. They huddled together, trying to craft a narrative strong enough to survive the truth they'd nearly tripped over. But I wasn't focused on them anymore. My attention locked onto something else, something I hadn't noticed until the light shifted just right along the ridge. A narrow strip of ground, barely visible beneath wild grass, glimmered with a faint line of old metal pins. Survey markers, real ones. Markers my father placed long before Silvercrest Bluffs existed. And suddenly, the deputy's question from earlier echoed in my mind, tinged now with new weight. Do you have anything showing this property is outside HOA boundaries? Not documents, not files, not papers stored in basements or garages, but physical truth embedded in the land itself. I stepped away from Ruiz and toward the ridge, tracing my boot through the soft dirt until the first pin caught the sun again. The sight hit me in the chest because it wasn't just evidence. It was memory. My father had hammered those markers into the earth when I was barely tall enough to reach the mallet. He'd made me hold each pin steady, telling me, "These don't move unless someone lies." I knelt, brushing the dirt gently from the metal. "Dad, you really didn't let anything slip," I whispered under my breath. Ruiz walked up behind me, the crunch of gravel soft under his steps. "What is that?" he asked. "A boundary pin," I replied. "Original placement, decades old." He crouched beside me, squinting at the metal edge. "You sure?" I nodded. Every surveyor in this county would recognize these markers. My father used the old numbering format. It's unmistakable. The clipboard queen barked from the ridge. "Deputy Ruiz, stay with the board, please." But he didn't stand. His eyes lingered on the pin, and I watched the realization ripple through him, slow, heavy, undeniable. This wasn't a claim. It wasn't a fight over interpretation. It was fixed, provable truth. The officer of rules called out sharply, "We need to finalize our evidence collection. Deputy, we'll email you the report." Ruiz didn't answer. He brushed the soil again, tracing the line of pins stretching across the ridge like a spine of buried steel. "These run all the way past the oak?" "Yes," I said, "and every single one proves my vineyard isn't part of their jurisdiction." A shadow passed across his face. Not doubt, not confusion, but the weight of understanding what this meant. He'd walked onto my land believing Marjorie's authority. Now he saw the lies she'd built her power on, and he didn't know how to step back from it. The tyrant in heels called out again, sharper now. "Deputy, we're leaving. Report to me this afternoon." Report to her. Not his department, not the county. Her. Ruiz exhaled slowly. "This isn't right," he muttered. "It's not," I agreed. "But now you know." He stood, torn, his loyalty pulled in two directions, duty and manipulation. And for the first time, he didn't try to hide that struggle. "I'll look into this," he said quietly. "Just keep those pins marked." As he walked back toward his SUV, Marjorie Keaton watched him with narrowed eyes, suspicion twisting her expression. She sensed the shift. She sensed the fracture. And she hated it. But I'd just found the key, not in a file, not on a screen, but buried beneath the grass where my father left it. A truth that would dismantle her entire empire. Marjorie Keaton's retreat wasn't a surrender. It was a regroup. The board chair paused at the end of the ridge, whispering sharply to the clipboard queen, while her officer of rules hovered behind her like a nervous shadow. Even from a distance, I could see the fury simmering under her polished exterior. The enforcer in crimson kept glancing back at me and Ruiz, trying to calculate how much damage that single boundary pin had done to her narrative. And she knew it was bad. She just didn't know how bad yet. Deputy Ruiz stood beside me, still staring at the line of survey markers stretching through the grass like a buried truth surfacing after years of being ignored. His conflict wasn't hidden anymore. It lived in every breath he took. One obligation pulled him toward the HOA matriarch, demanding obedience. Another dragged him toward the truth, hammered into the earth by my father's hands. "You understand what this means, right?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "It means the boundary is fixed. It's not open to interpretation. It never was." The tyrant in heels barked from the ridge. "Deputy Ruiz, we need a statement before we finalize our report." He flinched, not from fear, but from the pressure tightening around him. The clipboard queen waved her tablet like it was gospel law, and the officer of rules filmed every step she took, trying to reclaim authority through documentation that would collapse under real scrutiny. Ruiz's jaw tensed. "I need time," he said. "You won't get it from her," I warned. "She's coming back harder." He knew I was right. I could see it in the way he glanced toward his SUV, then back at the ridge where Marjorie waited like a storm-building force. He rubbed the back of his neck, stress pushing through the calm. "This Isn't how these calls usually go, he muttered almost to himself. Because this isn't a call, I replied. It's an ambush. The words landed. He didn't argue, didn't deny. He just breathed deeply, as if the weight of the entire morning pressed down on him. Behind us, the board chair raised her voice. Deputy, now! Ruiz exhaled through his teeth. I'll talk to her, but you need to prepare for whatever she does next. I'm already preparing. He walked toward the ridge, shoulders squared, steps heavier than before. Marjorie Keaton watched him approach with that sharp-eyed confidence, ready to reclaim control. But something flickered in her expression when she saw how slowly he moved, how his posture wasn't compliance but contemplation. Her voice dropped the moment he reached her. I couldn't hear the words, but I watched every shift in her face. The clipboard queen leaned in, whispering frantically. The officer of rules raised his camera again, angling it toward me like I was the one breaking laws. Marjorie's expression hardened. She pointed directly down the slope at my vineyard, her gestures sharp, aggressive, territorial. Ruiz barely nodded. Every movement he made was measured, like a man weighing consequences he never expected to face today. Then she stepped forward, eyes locked on me. You're done resisting, she announced. The board will issue a mandatory compliance order by tomorrow morning. I didn't move. Issue whatever you want. It won't change the boundary. The county will decide that, she snapped. No, I said, steady. The land already did. For the first time, her confidence cracked. Not dramatically, but enough. A tiny tremor of uncertainty that ruined the perfection of her smirk. She turned away abruptly, signaling her entourage. The clipboard queen scrambled to keep up. The officer of rules followed, muttering into his radio. The tyrant in heels didn't look back, but the speed of her steps told me one truth. She felt the ground shifting under her. And now the stakes weren't about control. They were personal. Deputy Ruiz didn't leave with Marjorie Keaton and her entourage. The board chair stormed off with the clipboard queen and the officer of rules in tow. Marching toward their SUVs like she was leading a retreat she refused to acknowledge as one. The enforcer in crimson kept glancing back at Ruiz, as if expecting him to fall in line, to follow the path she carved through intimidation and bluster. But he didn't move. He stayed rooted beside the boundary oak, staring at the ridge like something inside him finally snapped into place. I walked toward him slowly, giving him the space he clearly needed. His shoulders were tense, his breathing shallow. The conflict that had been simmering since the moment he arrived now sat openly on his face. He wasn't just an officer on a call anymore. He was a man wrestling with guilt, pressure, and responsibility in equal measure. She's not backing off, I said. You know that. He nodded once, jaw tightening. Yeah, I figured. The tyrant in heels was still audible from the ridge, her voice sharp, clipped, furious, lecturing the clipboard queen about non-compliant landowners and leveraging county relationships. But Ruiz didn't even turn toward her. He seemed drained, like he finally saw the full picture she'd been painting over this community for years. I need to tell you something, he said quietly. I folded my arms, waiting. Ruiz kept his eyes trained on the ridge, watching the enforcer in crimson wave her arms while her officers scurried to pack up their gear. You weren't the first call like this, he admitted. There have been complaints, not about your property, but about her methods. A cold breath slid through me. How many complaints? A lot more than our reports show. He swallowed hard, the weight of the admission pressing down on him. People are scared of her. They don't want to file official statements. They think the board chair controls everything. Property values, citations, neighborhood reputation. That's why Gwen looked like that, I murmured. He nodded. She's one of them. She's tried reporting the clipboard queen before, but the moment she tried to file anything, Marjorie showed up at her door, not with threats, nothing you can document, but with pressure. I stared at him. Pressure from an HOA president isn't supposed to reach county officials. Exactly, Ruiz whispered. But she's persistent. She's loud. She acts like she outranks us. And some officers, especially the newer ones, they buy into it. The officer of rules slammed a trunk. Shut. The clipboard queen frantically tapped at her tablet. Marjorie's silhouette stiffened when she realized Ruiz was still with me. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. His answer came without hesitation. "Because if this goes further, and it will, you need to know she doesn't stop at intimidation. She manipulates procedures. She blurs lines. She makes things look official even when they aren't." He looked down at the survey pin still visible at our feet. "And she's terrified that you know how to expose her." Something inside me settled, a quiet, steady certainty. "So, you're saying she's crossed lines before?" "She's erased them." He finally turned to me, tension still clinging to his frame. "I can't officially take sides, not yet. But I can tell you this. The county doesn't recognize Silvercrest Bluff's so-called extended perimeter. It's a myth she built, a fear tactic, a way to control neighbors who never signed anything." The truth sank deep, grounding everything I suspected. "And if you challenge her legally," he added, "you won't be alone. There are others who'll talk once someone else makes the first move." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Ruiz. That helps more than you know." He nodded once, a quiet pact passing between us. Then, as Marjorie Keaton finally drove off, kicking dust across the ridge, Ruiz stayed exactly where he was, no longer her silent shield, but a man on the edge of choosing a side. Ruiz's confession lingered in the air long after Marjorie Keaton disappeared down the road. The board chair's SUV left a smear of dust floating across the vineyard, but her presence, her arrogance, her threats, clung to the morning like a stain. The enforcer in crimson may have driven away, yet everything about her retreat screamed one thing. She wasn't done. She was regrouping, planning, circling back with something sharper. And that meant I had no time to sit still. I walked the ridge slowly, letting the sun warm the ground beneath my boots while I traced the faint line of survey pins. Each metal marker pulsed with history, my father's hammer strikes still echoing under the soil 30 years later. These weren't just markers, they were truth. Fixed, legal, permanent truth. And if Marjorie wanted a fight, these were going to be my weapons. Ruiz stood a few feet away, still struggling with the internal divide he had admitted minutes earlier. He watched me pace, hands on his hips, eyes heavy with responsibility. "You're thinking about going to the county, aren't you?" he asked. "I'm thinking about beating her at her own game," I said. He exhaled slowly. "She'll escalate the moment she realizes you're preparing a counteraction. I'm counting on it." The clipboard queen had hinted at filing some kind of emergency override. The officer of rules had been quietly documenting angles meant to distort the condition of my fence, and the tyrant in heels spoke like she already owned this land. I needed to stay 3 steps ahead. I turned toward the vineyard, focusing on the exact layout of the ridge, the oak, and the old markers. Victory wasn't going to come from shouting or waiting for her next attack. It would come from precision, my skill set, my training, the things she underestimated from the moment she saw me. "I need to map this," I muttered. Ruiz frowned. "Map what?" "The original parcel lines," I said. "Every pin, every natural marker, every ridge split. I know the boundaries better than anyone, but I need it laid out cleanly, visually. Something undeniable." He nodded slowly. "A formal plot?" "A field reconstruction," I corrected. "But not on paper. I'll mark it on the land itself." He raised an eyebrow. "You have the equipment?" "My father's old kit is still in the barn," I said. "Tripod, scope, rangefinder. The essentials are intact." Ruiz hesitated again, glancing down the road where the board chair had vanished. "If she comes back while you're doing this, she'll try to shut it down." "That's fine," I said. "Let her." Because the moment she tried, she'd exposed the flaw in her own authority. He studied my face, understanding dawning in his expression. "You're going to let her walk straight into her own trap." Exactly. And it wasn't a metaphor, it was strategy. She believed the law bent to her voice, her clipboard, her threats. But boundaries weren't decided in HOA meetings. They were measured in feet, markers, coordinates, and elevation lines. And I knew exactly how to reveal every inch of truth she wanted to bury. I glanced at the boundary oak, imagining the full alignment of the ridge once I plotted each pin. This wasn't just preparation, it was exposure. Once the data was visible on the land, even the most manipulated HOA meeting couldn't twist it. But I needed more than markers. I needed witnesses, people willing to see the truth with their own eyes before Marjorie twisted the narrative. Gwen, I muttered under my breath. And maybe a few others. Ruiz nodded slowly. You'll need them. I will. I stepped back from the ridge, committing every angle to memory. Tomorrow, I'd rebuild the boundary, not on paper, on the ground, in front of anyone watching. And when the clipboard queen returned, because she absolutely would, she'd find something waiting for her. A truth she couldn't erase, a line she couldn't cross, a fight she couldn't win. By dawn the next morning, the vineyard was quiet, eerily quiet. A thin mist curled through the vines, softening the horizon, but nothing softened the tension crawling through my chest. Today was the day I'd rebuild the boundary on the land itself. Today was the day the truth would become visible, and I knew, down to the bone, that Marjorie Keaton would return the moment she sensed something happening, without her permission. The board chair didn't allow movement she didn't control. I hauled my father's tripod and rangefinder up the ridge, the metal cold in my hands. Every step echoed his old lessons. Every tool held decades of his sweat and precision. When I reached the boundary oak, I set up the equipment, leveling the tripod legs into the soil with practiced pressure. It felt like slipping back into an old skin, one I hadn't worn since the day I promised him I'd protect this land. One by one, I sighted the old survey pins, lining the scope with each glinting marker. The mist began to lift, revealing the ridge like a page being turned. I stretched bright marking tape from pin to pin, laying a visual spine across the property. A boundary no HOA threat could rewrite. While I worked, Gwen approached from her yard below, edging toward the fence with hesitance etched into her shoulders. "You're actually doing it," she said quietly. "Someone has to." She hugged her arms. "The clipboard queen was in our cul-de-sac last night. She was furious. You should know that." Of course she was. The enforcer in crimson never accepted a challenge without constructing a counterattack. "Did she say what she planned?" I asked. Gwen hesitated. Just that she'd re-establish compliance and correct non-compliant perceptions. She said the board would make an example out of anyone who defied them. I breathed slowly, anchoring my focus. Good. Let her come. I moved farther down the ridge, pulling the tape tight as I aligned the next section. This wasn't just a boundary. It was a trap laid by truth itself. The tyrant in heels could scream, threaten, twist terminology, fabricate violations. But she couldn't bend metal that had sat in the earth for decades. By mid-morning, the sun had burned through the mist, revealing the full stretch of marked pins, each one wrapped in bright tape. The line was unmistakable, an unbroken path cutting through the land, unmistakably outside the HOA's reach. I backed up, surveying the full picture. It was clean, precise, powerful, and legally irrefutable. Just as I began photographing the entire span for documentation, I heard gravel crunching. A vehicle approached, slow, deliberate, familiar. Ruiz. He stepped out of his SUV with a tension I recognized instantly. "She's coming," he said. I nodded. "Good timing, I'm ready." He scanned the markers, his eyes widening slightly. "You did all this already?" Before she can sabotage it, Ruiz stepped closer to one of the pins, brushing the tape gently with his fingers. Elias, this is solid. Anyone with surveying knowledge would recognize the original placements. She's not going to like this. She doesn't have to like it. She just has to face it." He looked up toward the road again. "Brace yourself. She brought the officer of rules this time, and the clipboard queen, and—" He hesitated. "A few board members, a full entourage, a show of force. Classic Marjorie Keaton." I exhaled once. Let her see it. Ruiz watched me for a long moment. "You're escalating." "No," I said, stepping onto the ridge and facing the road head-on. "I'm preparing." And then, just as the sun hit the boundary line perfectly, a crimson SUV appeared at the bend, bright, polished, and unmistakably hers. The enforcer in crimson had come to reclaim her imagined authority. She had no idea she was about to collide with the truth my father left buried in steel. The crimson SUV rolled to a stop with a hiss of gravel, and the door swung open before the engine even settled. Marjorie Keaton stepped out like she was emerging onto a stage she had built herself. The enforcer in crimson surveyed the ridge with a slow, calculating sweep, eyes narrowing the moment she spotted the long line of bright marking tape cutting across my land. Behind her, the clipboard queen hurried forward, clutching a stack of printed forms to her chest like shields. The officer of rules stepped out next, gripping his camera as if he expected to uncover a crime the moment he pointed it at me. 2 additional board members followed, their stiff postures and anxious glances revealing exactly why they were present. Intimidation by numbers. Marjorie didn't blink. She didn't breathe. She simply walked toward the boundary line, heels biting into the earth with controlled fury. "What?" she said slowly. "Do you think you're doing?" "Making the truth visible," I replied. She stopped at the first pin, staring down at it like the metal had personally insulted her. "This," she gestured toward the marker, "is unauthorized construction." Ruiz stepped closer, calm but firm. "Boundary markers aren't construction, Ms. Keaton." She turned on him sharply. "Deputy, I wasn't speaking to you." "But I'm speaking to you," he said. Her nostrils flared. The tyrant in heels wasn't used to being contradicted. Certainly not by someone she'd controlled through pressure and presence for years. "Take photos," she snapped at the officer of rules. He immediately began snapping pictures, not of the boundary pins, but of me, the equipment, even the ground beneath the tripod. Manufactured documentation, just like before. The clipboard queen joined in, tapping furiously at her tablet. "We're logging this as unauthorized land alteration with potential environmental impact. The board will have full authority to issue an emergency override." "There is no emergency override," I said. "There's no authority here at all." Marjorie's gaze cut to me, sharp enough to slice through flesh. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Mercer." "No," I replied, stepping beside the boundary oak. "I'm revealing yours." Her eyes flicked to the oak, and something in her posture stiffened. Recognition, but also something deeper. Fear. Because she finally understood what the pins meant. This wasn't guesswork. This wasn't interpretation. This was proof. Ruiz stepped forward, voice steady. "Ms. Keaton, the county recognizes boundary markers like these as valid physical indicators of jurisdiction. If his property lies outside your HOA, if," she snapped, spinning toward him, "you don't get to decide boundaries." "I don't," he said, "but the land does." The board chair's control wavered. Her eyes darted from pin to the long line of tape stretching along the ridge. "These markers could have been planted recently," she said quickly. "We'll need an inspection to verify authenticity." "You can't inspect land you don't control," I replied. "And those markers were placed decades ago. Every surveyor in this county knows the numbering format." The clipboard queen hesitated, just for a second. Doubt cracked her expression before she covered it. Marjorie saw it, and it enraged her. "Deputy," she demanded, "order him to stop this." Ruiz shook his head. "I can't, and I won't." A tremor ran through her jaw. The officer of rules lowered his camera, watching the tension stretch thin as wire. "You think this display changes anything?" she murmured, voice low and brittle. "It changes everything," I said. She stared at the boundary line, breathing shallowly. Her power, built on fear, on authority she never truly possessed, was crumbling right in front of her. And she knew it. "We'll settle this publicly," she whispered, "in front of everyone." "Good," I said. "I'm counting on it." Because tomorrow's board gathering wouldn't be her show of force. It would be her downfall. The community hall buzzed long before I walked through the doors. Voices tangled in anxious clusters, neighbors leaning against folding chairs, whispering about what the board chair planned to unleash. Silvercrest Bluffs rarely drew crowds this large, unless there was gossip, scandal, or fear, and today held all three. At the front of the room, Marjorie Keaton stood like a queen awaiting coronation. The enforcer in crimson had chosen a sharper blazer today, her expression carved from stone. The clipboard queen hovered at her side, clutching a tablet like it was sacred law. The officer of rules paced behind them, adjusting his camera strap, preparing to document whatever narrative she intended to manufacture next. Several board members lined the front row, stiff and uneasy, clearly dragged here to serve as her backup choir. When I stepped inside, the murmurs shifted. Some neighbors looked relieved, others looked terrified. A few whispered my name like I'd just walked into a battlefield. And then Marjorie saw me. Her stare sliced through the chatter. "Mr. Mercer," she said, voice raised, "you're just in time for your hearing." "Hearing?" I repeated, stepping forward. "The board will be reviewing your violations. the clipboard queen announced with a rehearsed smile. There are no violations, I said. The tyrant in heels smirked. That's what we're here to decide. Ruiz stood near the back of the room, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But he nodded at me once, a quiet acknowledgement. He'd come to watch, to witness, to choose a side. Marjorie stepped behind a podium and tapped the microphone. This meeting, she began, is to address the dangerous ongoing non-compliance of a property adjacent to Silvercrest Bluffs. The landowner has interfered with safety inspections, refused lawful directives, and altered environmental boundaries without approval. People murmured, fear rippled, doubt pressed in. I stepped forward. Everything she just said is false. The officer of rules lifted his camera immediately, filming me like I was already guilty. Marjorie's smile tightened. Mr. Mercer, you will speak when recognized. I wasn't recognized when you trespassed on my vineyard either, I shot back. A wave of murmurs rolled through the hall. Gwen stood near the aisle, wringing her hands, eyes wide. She wasn't the only one listening closely. The clipboard queen tapped her tablet. The board has compiled photographs of unauthorized alterations. Alterations? I echoed. You mean boundary markers that existed before this neighborhood was built? The enforcer in crimson froze. I continued, letting the quiet build. Yesterday, I marked the original survey pins placed by my father 30 years ago. Every pin sits well outside your HOA border. Every line proves my land is independent. A man in the crowd asked, "Is that verified?" Ruiz stepped forward before Marjorie could speak. "Yes," he said. "Those markers are legitimate and consistent with historical parcel design." The tension shattered like glass. Gasps scattered across the room. Marjorie spun on him. "Deputy, that's outside your scope." "It's within my scope to clarify fact," he said firmly. Her posture faltered. The clipboard queen's fingers froze mid-scroll. The officer of rules stopped filming. I stepped closer to the podium. "Your HOA never filed expansion paperwork. You don't have extended perimeter authority. You don't have jurisdiction. And you never did." A neighbor muttered, "We knew it." Another whispered, "She lied." The board chair's composure cracked. "This meeting isn't about boundaries." "It is now," I said. The room erupted. Questions, anger, relief, disbelief. Ruiz raised a hand, restoring order. "The county's position is clear. Silvercrest Bluffs cannot enforce policies on land outside its legal limits." Marjorie inhaled sharply, her face draining of color. The tyrant in heels looked suddenly very small. Someone in the crowd asked, "So his land is off limits to the HOA?" "Yes," Ruiz confirmed. And with that single word, years of fear in, this room collapsed. Marjorie's power evaporated. Her narrative shattered. Her authority broke in front of everyone she once ruled. And the crowd watched her downfall in silence so thick it swallowed the air. The room stayed frozen for several long seconds after Ruiz's confirmation, the tension so sharp it felt like a wire stretched across the community hall. All eyes shifted toward Marjorie Keaton, waiting, some with hope, some with fear, all with disbelief, to see whether the woman who'd ruled this neighborhood like her own personal kingdom would finally crack. The board chair's jaw trembled, but she forced her shoulders back, struggling to piece together the authority she'd just watched crumble. The clipboard queen hovered beside her, clutching her tablet like a lifeline. The officer of rules lowered his camera entirely now, the weight of his silence louder than any footage he could have taken. Even the board members in the front row looked down at their hands, refusing to meet her eyes. The enforcer in crimson wasn't just losing control. She was losing an audience. I let the quiet stretch. Let the truth breathe through the hall. My father always said, silence revealed more truth than shouting, and right now, that silence made Marjorie's unraveling painfully clear. "You misled this community," I said finally, voice steady. "You used fear, ambiguity, and power you never legally had." She snapped her head toward me. "You think this ends here?" The tyrant in heels hissed. "You think a few buried pins determine authority?" "They determine jurisdiction," I replied, "and that's all that matters." Gwen stepped forward from the crowd, surprising even herself. "We were scared to question you," she said, voice shaking but determined. "We thought you could do whatever you wanted." Another neighbor added, You made us feel like we didn't have rights on our own land." Marjorie spun toward them, desperation cracking through her mask. "I acted in the community's best interest." "No," Ruiz said, cutting her off. "You acted in your own." The clipboard queen flinched. One board member quietly removed his name badge, setting it on his lap as if disassociating from her entirely. The officer of rules shifted uneasily, camera hanging limp at his side. I stepped toward the podium, grounding myself in the strength I'd rebuilt over the past days. "You targeted my vineyard because it was easier than admitting your HOA had limits. My father spent his life marking these boundaries correctly. You tried to erase them, but the land doesn't bend for intimidation." Her voice cracked. "You're making a mistake, Mercer." "No," I said quietly. "I'm correcting one." Ruiz addressed the room. "Effective immediately, the county acknowledges this property is outside Silvercrest Bluff's jurisdiction. Any further enforcement attempts by Ms. Keaton or the board will be treated as trespassing and misuse of authority." A collective exhale washed through the hall. The spell she'd cast over this community, through fear, citations, and self-declared power, finally broke. The enforcer in crimson staggered back a half step. No one rushed to steady her. The clipboard queen closed her tablet, defeated. The officer of rules avoided her gaze entirely. Neighbors approached me, some clapping my shoulder, others whispering thank you, many simply relieved. Not because of me, but because someone finally pushed back against the force they'd lived under for years. Marjorie pressed a trembling hand against the podium, trying to salvage the last fragments of her authority. "This board, this community, will not forget this." "They shouldn't," I said. "They should remember exactly how easily fear can become policy when no one resists it." Her eyes burned with humiliation, but she had nothing left to fight with. No jurisdiction, no fabricated authority, no audience willing to believe her. The meeting ended with her storming out of the hall, heels striking the floor in sharp, uneven rhythms. Not triumph, not control, just retreat. Outside, the evening sun cast a warm glow across the vineyards, lighting the ridge where the boundary pins still stood, clear and undeniable. I walked toward them, breathing in the smell of soil and oak, feeling my father's legacy settle around me like armor. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant. It was steady, rooted, measured, just like the lines he'd left behind for me to defend. And as I looked across the land he entrusted to me, I whispered, "I kept the promise." If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now. Share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.